This video is sponsored by Zyro. Zyro is an online platform that makes building a website incredibly easy, with plenty of unique templates that make it easy for you to create a blog or even a portfolio to highlight your work, like I've done. It took me no time simply to drag and drop a few photos into the website with this unique, elegant design, and boom, I'm done. So take advantage of the 24/7 customer support and 30-day money-back guarantee. So hit that link below and use my code MarcusLloyd at checkout and receive an exclusive limited time discount plus a custom domain and 3 months free with any yearly plan. So back to the video. So it's been about a year since I've had the M8 in my life. And since then, I have been fortunate to take it along quite a bit of trips at this point. Places like Greece, Mexico City, Oaxaca, Texas, Jamaica, Austria, Miami, Montreal, and of course NYC. So I feel like I have a lot to say and a decent amount of experience, and I also feel like I'll put it through its paces to kind of have a true understanding of what the M8 truly is as a camera. And let me jump off and just get right to it. The CCD sensor is the #1 reason you go into the M8. For me personally, I was in that decision of trying to decide if I wanted to pursue an M6 or an M4, kind of go on the film route. The M8 started to kind of pop up to me as an idea, and when I came across what the CCD sensor could do, I was already wowed, but I was a bit worried about the limitations. Now, I will say, this camera does have its fair amount of limitations, but if you're like me, I thrive on limitations, and I use those limitations to work within and to kind of let creativity expand from that. I think limitations are good in creativity, right? For instance, one of the limitations with this camera is I only shoot this camera at ISO 160. Now, to some, you may want a digital camera that can bump up to 3200 or 6400. But I have decided to see that limitation as a pro. So if I was to take this camera out, I know that the conditions need to be proper, or it needs to be a daylight situation where I bring this camera out. Now, some may see that and say, look, I'm not interested at all. But for me, I was still interested. Partially because if I was going to get a film camera, this could essentially be that film camera with that same limitation. Because in my mind, what's the difference between just having a roll of Portrait 160 loaded in the camera? I would just take the photos that I could take with that ISO, and I would just let it be that. And that's kind of one of the points I mean in terms of letting limitations, kind of like leaning into the limitations, for lack of better terms. The CCD sensor is rich with detail and texture and feeling, which is really interesting because I wouldn't go out to say that this camera has a ton of dynamic range. I actually think that's another one of its limitations. But on the flip side of that, what I found with this camera was that it takes very, very little editing to kind of produce the photo that I like to produce and to get the colors and the richness that I'm looking for. So again, another one of those situations where I saw the limitation, leaned right into it, let it be what it is. Another one of those limitations is a 10 megapixel sensor. And for me, that was a bit of a worry because again, buying a digital camera in 2021 at the time when I bought this, 10 megapixel sensor, all these sensors now are much, much better, have a lot more resolution. So why do this? For me, it was the simplicity of getting a file that was super, super beautiful, maybe limiting to work with, but at the end of the day, produces a consistently beautiful image. So I couldn't trade that off. With that said, I want to show you guys a few photos that I've taken along the way on some travels with this M8, with this CCD sensor. Let me know what you think. thing that I forgot to mention about the CCD sensor, and I was thinking about these lenses and I realized the UV IR cut filter. Now, I grabbed two of them, one for the 28 and one for the 35, and we're gonna get into these lenses in just a second. But one thing I will say was, I took this camera to Greece on my first trip and I didn't have the UV IR cut filter attached to the 28. And while overall I loved the photos that I made in my time in Greece, I did see the difference in some of the greens and in some of the blacks. The greens tended to go a little more yellowy and almost like a burnt green look. And the blacks, the synthetic blacks on clothes, had a weird purple tint or look to them. The shots where there were synthetic blacks tended to be unusable just because that purple look just kind of throws off the overall look of the overall shot. So those shots became unusable, but when the greens become muddy, it was more of an aesthetic and it became just kind of a feel for the photo, and I still used them and they were fine, even though I knew deep down there was a richness in the greens and more of a pop in the greens than the photo showed. But I will say, I think it's mandatory to grab the UV IR cut filter, mainly because of getting those true colors and taking this camera to places like Miami and Jamaica and seeing those true blues and greens and how rich they can be, and allowing this sensor to thrive in that space that it can thrive in, low ISO, vibrant colors, and just seeing it pop in that way. I highly recommend getting the UV IR cut filter. I immediately grabbed a 28mm focal length lens, and I decided to go with the Voigtlander Ultron. Mainly because of price point. I wasn't really looking into getting the Elmerit, even though I think I might upgrade to the Elmerit, but at the time I wanted that extra stop of light at f2. Super sharp lens, which everyone tends to know that about Voigtlander. I will say, if we're talking about nuances, one of the things that I've noticed is, compared to Leica glass, is the focus tab, the focus throw. While it's smooth, it's not as smooth. Sometimes you kind of gotta, and I'm not gonna say but let's just say, if you bump up to Leica glass, there is a luxury feel to the focusing component of the lens. And yeah, I mean, I love this lens and it's fine. And then eventually I upgraded and grabbed a Zeiss 35 f2 Biogon lens. Now this lens has been a real treat to use as well. One, because if I put this on the M8 with the crop sensor, it comes out to 50 focal length. So that makes this really nice for portraits. And the Zeiss glass has this unique 3D pop that it adds to the photo that's super unique, and something I really enjoyed. So when I pair this with the M8, and obviously the silver on silver just makes it super, super sexy. When I pair it with the M8, it gives it this richness and vibrancy in the portrait shots that I take. So I highly recommend the 35 f2. Honestly, I think I just recommend Zeiss glass in general. And but yeah, and the 28, I think I mentioned it, but the 28 comes out to a 35 focal length, which is really, really nice, because 35 almost seems to be the perfect length for this camera because it fills the entire frame lines. Another thing that I've noticed with this camera is that there's sometimes some sensor issues, and it's like this mark, and I think it could be potential sensor failure that's on its way. Please don't be. But there has been multiple times, and I've seen this happen consistently throughout different climates, that I will get like this sensor burn. It's almost like a lens flare for this camera, and it's one of those things where I've kind of just adapted to, and I just like charge it to the game and kind of see it as like, oh, it's like if I was to lose a shot on a roll of film. I try to process it that way without getting upset, but that is another thing that I wanted to bring to your attention if you are interested in getting the M8. So that's it for this week's episode, y'all. I just really wanted to sit down, chat about the M8, Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this channel. I have a ton of fun videos coming out, shooting a bunch of different buddies. It's hot outside in New York City, so there's gonna be a lot more hanging out, a lot more video creations. Got some trips coming up, so TBD on the trips because I don't know which order they're gonna come, but a lot of exciting stuff. So I'll see you guys next week. Peace.